New Mexico has a timeout. Dent with the ball, down 3, final seconds. Gets the screen, Dent to the corner, launches a 3, missed it. Meadow the rebound, Cardenas outlet. Boise State has done it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Basketball in the Mountains. This is episode 39. I am your host, as always, Tyler King, and we are rolling right along with our College Hoops season preview series with the 2025-26 season just a week and a half away, or I guess when you're going to be listening to this, about a week away. So November 3rd is the big day. Next Monday, we're going to get the season underway, and we've got a bunch of teams already done in the feed. You had some coaches on, getting back into some media guests, some of my pals here in the media sphere, and another episode I'm really looking forward to today. A contender, or preseason contender, at least in the Mountain West, a team that was in the Mountain West championship game last season, just missed out on another NCAA tournament berth, and that is the Boise State Broncos, picked to finish third in the Mountain West, their last year in the Mountain West, and a little bit of a new look, not really a new look conference this year, but Grand Canyon entering the fold a year earlier than expected. So another pretty competitive program coming in. Hope to talk about them a bunch on the podcast this year as well, because obviously they fall in the Mountain Time Zone too. So looking forward to previewing Boise State today, though. And to do so, we've got Nathan Carroll on the show. Nathan, how you doing?
Doing well, Tyler. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking ball and talking Boise State hoops.
Yeah, it's a program that I really enjoy watching and talking about, because obviously Leon Rice, the coach up there, is really good friends with Tad Boyle, who I cover down here in Colorado. Those two guys have been friends for a long time, and they're both entering year 16 at their respective programs. So kind of a milestone for both those guys, and two of the guys that are still doing it kind of the old school way, as they like to say. But you were in Vegas earlier this week for Mountain West Media Days. Both men's and women's basketball had that event going on this week, which I'm sure was a ton of fun. Just kind of, what was your big takeaway, not just from Boise State, but from the league as a whole as it enters the last year of this current iteration of it?
Yeah, well, the talk of the weekend was definitely, well, I guess it's a Thursday, but the talk of the little 2 days we were there was definitely just the changing of the landscape of college basketball. Obviously, a lot of talk about NIL, but that same week, we saw the first G League player commit to a collegiate program. So there was a lot of talk about just that, the direction of where everything is going. And then, the other talk of the Mountain West was just San Diego State, unanimously picked to win the conference, which I didn't think had happened before, but I guess in the 2019-20 season, Utah State had also been picked as a unanimous winner. But I think we've all kind of removed that season from our brains, considering there was no completion to that season. So a lot of talk about San Diego State and the squad that they have back, a lot of talk about just the changing landscape of college basketball. And then obviously, working with Bronco Nation News, a lot of getting into the nitty gritty of Boise State basketball as well.
Yeah, San Diego State obviously topping the preseason poll. Utah State number 2, which we'll have an episode on the feed later this week on previewing the Aggies. Excited for that one as well. But Boise State, like I mentioned, third, right ahead of Grand Canyon and New Mexico, two of the other teams here in the Mountain Time Zone. It's kind of it's kind of a retooled roster a little bit for Boise State. Obviously, when you lose a guy like Tyson Degenhart, who was a key player for this program for many years, a legend, if you want to be frank, for this Broncos program. Obviously, that's going to change things with how heliocentric the offense was built around him. And obviously, Alvaro Cardenas was such a great player and good point guard for this program last year. Just kind of how impressed were you with how quickly the staff was able to kind of, like I said, retool this roster and get it back to the point where the expectations remain competing for a Mountain West championship, just like they were in every year with Degenhart as the head of this program?
Yeah, I think Leon Rice and the staff did a really good job of doing something that not a lot of mid-major programs do, which is go out and get 2 Power 4 starters or Power 5 starters, right? They grabbed Dylan Andrews from UCLA, who had started 60 games at UCLA over the past 2 years. You grabbed Drew Fielder from Georgetown, who is originally from the Boise, Idaho area, from Rocky Mountain High School there in Meridian. They bring him in. He started, I believe, 25 games at Georgetown last year, somewhere in that ballpark. So, the staff did a really good job of getting in 2 guys that they feel like are going to fit the program. And it's a very different look. You lose the program's all-time scoring leader in Degenhart. You lose the single season assist leader in Alvaro Cardenas. It's going to look a lot different, but I think the staff made some really smart moves, and there's a chance that this team actually probably looks a little bit more like some of the Leon Rice teams of the past half decade or so in terms of identity and the way they play. Last year's team was a very unique team, right? One of the best offensive teams of the Leon Rice era, but took a step back defensively. There were some issues figuring out the lineup. I think at one point in the season, it was like 13 different starting lineups when it was all said and done. A lot of tinkering and just couldn't quite find that best fit. And what ended up happening a lot last year is it felt like your best 5 often didn't have your best 5, if you know what I mean, right? Like trying to find the right guys to fit together. I think part of the goal of this team, the roster should fit a little bit more cohesively. So it's going to be a big season for Leon Rice and stuff. I mean, expectations are to get back to the NCAA tournament. This fan base is eager to get that first win in program history in an NCAA tournament game. And so expectations are high. And I think the staff feels pretty good about what they did in the offseason for this roster.
Yeah, I remember talking to Leon after the game against Colorado State last year in Fort Collins, just because I know he was a little bit, like you said, trying to tinker with things, and it just felt like there was some frustration for the staff and not being able to get the most out of what they felt like was a talented roster. Like, you knew you were getting from Cardenas and Degenhart every night, but everything else was just kind of up in the air. And without those guys, like you mentioned, Dylan Andrews, like obviously he was at media days this week. Like that's a pretty big sign from a coaching staff right away that they trust a newcomer to go represent the program in front of the national media and stuff like that. Obviously, Javen Buchanan was there too. Just kind of who are the leaders of this group? Who's emerged kind of as you've been around this team the last couple of weeks as they get ready for the season? Who could be the key guys that are the voices of this team heading into the year? Like we said, without Cardenas and Degenhart, who were the unquestioned leaders last year.
Yeah, I think Javen Buchanan's without a doubt going to be one of the vocal leaders. I mean, very, very talkative player, very active in practice, and really takes a lot of that leadership role. He was the 6th man of the year last year in the Mountain West, but something that not a lot of people knew and really didn't become public until a couple months ago was that I believe after the season ended, he had 2 or 3 surgeries, had to get something cleaned up in his back, had some hip issues as well. So he was really gutting through last season, which is kind of why he took that 6th man role. Some games felt better than other, and he went out there and could score 30 points and look like an all Mountain West caliber player. And other games, I think, was just really hampered by some of those injuries. So he's going to be one of the leaders for this team. Drew Fielder's another guy who is the Georgetown transfer, very loud, very talkative. He's the guy on this team that just even watching just against the exhibition against Idaho, he's the guy who's going to get guys fired up. He's the one that when he hits a 3 or when he gets a big block, he's going to scream, shout, yell, get the crowd going. So in terms of more the vocal leadership size, those 2 guys are absolutely 2 of them. Andrew Meadows, a returner, more of a reserved, quiet type of guy, but he's kind of become notorious for you feel like he didn't really have a huge impact to the game. Then you look at the box score and he had 16 points, right? Just so consistent, gets his numbers, has the impact on the team. And then Dylan Andrews is the other one who's kind of an unknown right now. Missed the exhibition in Idaho with a very minor injury that Leon Rice said, if we had a conference game today, he'd be playing. They just wanted to get him fully healthy before the start of the season. But he really is the wild card for this team. Last year at UCLA, not the best year for him. Averaged just over 6 points per game. But you go back to his sophomore year, averaged nearly 13 points per game. Was really empowered as a scorer that year and was exceptional. Had I believe a 14-game stretch at the end of the season where he was scoring 17 points per game on really efficient numbers. If Boise State gets that version of Dylan Andrews, I think you're definitely talking about a team where the sky's the limit. if you get the Dylan Andrews that we saw at UCLA last year, I think there becomes a little bit more reservations. But Dylan Andrews, I mean, he got the invite to media day, so I think the staff really likes him. I think they believe he's going to be that maximized version of himself, and we'll see what kind of leadership role he has, on the floor. I know that there's been a lot of talk about him and true freshman AG Nato, as they've formed a really good relationship, and he's really pouring into him on how to be a collegiate point guard, but haven't really seen yet what Dylan Andrews can bring to the Broncos.
Yeah, this Boise State team, Sneaky, has a really good amount of production coming back despite losing Degenhart and Cardenas. You mentioned Andrew Mehta, who was second on the team in scoring, and I remember watching him in that championship game in the Mountain West tournament against Colorado State, and just being so impressed by, like you said, all the little stuff he does well. He hits shots when they come to him. He plays really hard on the defensive end, crashes the glass, does all the stuff that coaches like Leon Rice really like out of a player. And you mentioned Javen Buchanan as well. Like, he's a guy I've always been really impressed with every time I've seen him in person. You mentioned the injuries last year. That's a reason why we didn't see him as much as maybe some fans would have expected. But there's plenty of others returning for this team as well. How has that translated in practice so far in the preseason? Just kind of all of the continuity that they have, despite the two main guys from last year's team leaving. But I mean, you plug in Andrews and Fielder, and those guys could it just feels like there's those guys plug and play right into the spots that are missing from the starting lineup from last year.
Yeah, a thought that I've heard a couple of times from people in and around the team is, how do you have a team that looks so similar but feels so different, right? Because there is such a void left by Cardenas and by Degenhart, but you really do have a lot of guys coming back. We talked about Meadow and Buchanan, but RJ Keene became, sort of an energy player off the bench for this team last year. Pearson Carmichael didn't play, I think, the first 12 games of the season. They were going to redshirt him, and he was playing so well in practice that they decided to throw him out there. He had a really strong finish to the season. Dominic Parolin, it's a transfer from Lehigh, who redshirted last year with injury. So he's been around the program. He's a guy that, other players feel comfortable with, even though it'll be his first year getting minutes for the Broncos. So there is a lot of returning players, a lot of returning production. And I know I missed a couple of guys, even like Julian Bowie's back for his second season in Boise. But it's a lot more about, all right, we know the players, we know what they should be able to bring. Let's try to find these guys their best fit, find them their best role. And I think that was part of the issue that we talked about last year. Despite having Tyson Degenhart and Omar Stanley, there was a ton of turnover on the roster last year. And it took Leon Rice and the staff probably 20-25 games to really figure out what they needed the team to look like. I think the goals this year, they hit their stride a lot earlier because they have so much returning production coming in. And just the two transfers this year, try to plug them in. And hopefully that leads to playing their best ball a lot earlier in the season.
Yeah, you mentioned that exhibition game they had against Idaho earlier this month. Just kind of, and obviously Dylan Andrews didn't play in that game. But what did you see from overall? I mean, Drew Fielder had a big game in that with 24 points. Andrew Meadow, like I said, was pretty consistent. Javen Buchanan as well. Just kind of, what did you see from that group in that game as they get ready for the start of the season on November 3rd?
Yeah, I think this team's going to be pretty deep. I think at the start of the season, we probably see a 10-man rotation. Leon Rice put 11 guys in that exhibition, including Bon Blom, true freshman, who got 5 minutes. Don't know we see him in the rotation yet this year, but clearly there's 11 guys that he likes enough to give some run early on there in that exhibition. And that's something that at media days, as soon as you asked Leon about this team or Javen Buchanan about this team, they were quick to bring up the depth. They feel like they have a lot of different guys who can score the ball, a lot of guys who can defend, a lot of guys who can rebound. So I think this is going to be a deep basketball team. I think they're going to want to play 10 guys to start the year. And then as the season wears on, try to probably filter that down to, an 8 or 9 man lineup that you feel comfortable going into Mountain West tournament play. But I think they're going to have a little bit more of a defensive identity this year as well. I think they want to get back to that. Last year's team was the worst per Ken Palm's adjusted defense metrics, I believe, since the 2020 season. That 3-year run where they had made 3 straight tournaments, it really was defense first and foremost, and we'll kind of figure out the offense around that. Last year's team kind of flipped that. It was one of the best offensive teams of the Leon Rice era, but defensively took a step back. I think they want to be long, athletic, and defend really hard this year.
And getting into the early part of the schedule here, there's a bunch of really interesting games on the calendar. Obviously, they open with Hawaii Pacific on November 3rd, but after that, Utah Valley is a really good program that'll be coming to Extra Mile Arena on that in that first weekend of the season. Montana State is a good Big Sky program. Wichita State as well. We've seen what they could do in the NCAA tournament, and then they go to the Maui Invite where there could be a various teams, power teams that Boise State is playing. Just kind of how important are these first couple weeks going to be for just figuring out who the key guys are going to be for this team, especially offensively, and kind of what are you excited to see against some of these pretty top either mid-major programs or some Power 5 programs when they get into that Thanksgiving week there as well?
Well, unfortunately for the Leon Rice era, one of the hallmarks has kind of been taking a bad early season loss that ends up really hurting your resume deep into the year, right? Last year, it was the loss to Boston College and their MTE that ended up sinking their tournament chances. The year before, in 2024, there was a blowout loss to Butler that I know the staff wanted back. 2023, they had losses to South Dakota State and Charlotte to open up the season. So it's been an issue for this Boise State team of being able to start fast, especially in some of those games that they should win. You mentioned the Utah Valley game. I think that's the really big game. That's a good basketball program that if you're going to look for that, okay, what's that Q3, Q4 loss that Boise State has historically taken? Like that's the one that they need to win. And that's where I think the staff hopes that some of the continuity in the roster should help them be better right away. I think in some of those early games where in past years, there was still tinkering on who's going to be our guys, who's going to be our go-to scorer in big moments. The thought process can be, hey, if all else fails, we know Javen Buchanan can isolate and get buckets for this team. We know RJ Keene can come in and give really good, hard energy minutes that are going to help keep you out of a drought, right? Help just make things happen. So the early part of the schedule is it's going to have to be navigated, I guess. I'll put it that way. You've got 5 home games to open up the season before going to Maui. I think you really want to go 5-0 in those 5 games, not to tank your resume. And that's, like I said, that's we're doing a countdown series over on Bronco Nation News, and our 9th question heading into the season was just, can they avoid that Q3, Q4 loss in the first month or two of the season? It's certainly a manageable schedule where you feel like they should win those games, but if you just plug in the Ken Pom, win probability on all of their non-con home games, it's like about a coin flip to win all of them, right? And so taking care of business is going to be big for this early part of the season.
Yeah, you mentioned that Butler loss a couple years ago. They'll have a chance to get revenge. They're going to Hinkle Fieldhouse in early December. That'll be a big one to watch as well. They play St. Mary's in Idaho Falls, which will be a great game. And then right after that, Mountain West play is here. They kicked it off at Nevada in Reno on December 20th. Got a little bit more of an extended Mountain West schedule this year with Grand Canyon coming to the league. So that should be fun. Just before I get you out of here, Nathan, how does this Boise State squad match up to what you've seen or what you expect to see from the rest of the Mountain West? Because a lot of it is unknown with some of the turnover on a lot of the key teams, a bunch of new coaches in the league this year. Obviously, the addition of Grand Canyon that throws a wrench in a thing. Just where does this Boise State team rank to you, or match up to? How do they match up to you against the rest of the conference, which obviously is going to be led by San Diego State, at least in the early part of the season?
Yeah, in the preseason poll, they came in 3rd, and that's where I had them on my ballot. I think that's a fair ranking for.
I had them there too. Yeah.
It's I think right there in that 2, 3, 4 range is probably where they most likely end up this season. But I think there's a little bit more upside on this team. Obviously San Diego State looks like a Goliath that'll be really tough to top. But I absolutely think there's a world where this team is a pretty close second to San Diego State if all of the pieces do start to click together. But there are just a few unknowns. The 3-point shooting was really poor last season. Now they've got a lot of guys that they feel like are good shooters, but just didn't translate to game day all the time, right? When your best shooter was shooting 35.2% from 3, it's not a great 3-point shooting team. So need to see the shooting get a little better. Need to see, okay, what do they get out of Dylan Andrews? Because if he's not the best version of himself, this team really doesn't have a traditional point guard outside of him and a true freshman on the roster. So I think third for the preseason is absolutely fair. And then I think there's some upside there if you start to talk about some of those pieces starting to click and some of those returning players start to take leaps. But, we haven't seen that happen yet. So third, I think is fair for now, but I definitely think there's upside there to get to number 2.
Yeah, for sure. I think them or Utah State would have been a coin flip for me in the preseason poll. I just went with Utah State with just a little bit more certainty with some of the returning guys. But I mean, I think Boise State. I think you're absolutely right. The ceiling of this team is quite high, and I think the NCAA tournament expectations are warranted for this squad because this decade that's what Leon Rice has done. Obviously, you mentioned the fan base wants to win once they get to March Madness, but Leon's done a good job of at least getting them there. And I was at that game in Dayton a couple years ago when they played against Colorado. They were so close to that breakthrough there, and it feels like this could be finally that year for this squad. But I appreciate you coming on, Nathan. This was a great addition to our season preview series. Where can people find your work? Because I know you do a great job with Bronco Nation News and covering this, not just hoops, but football and all the other stuff you got going on there as well.
Yeah, you said it. BroncoNationNews.com is where you can find all of my work. We're a 247 affiliate, so you'll see all the typical 247 that you're used to when you're looking up recruiting, and we've got basketball coverage, football coverage. My role in particular is to dive in a lot to some of the analytics and the numbers and talk through some of those, kind of present that to the fan base who otherwise may not be aware that it's there. So yeah, Bronco Nation News. You can check out all of our stuff over there.
All right, man. I appreciate you coming on, and I'm certainly going to have you back on during the season as this Boise State team gets underway because it's going to be one I certainly have my eye on, especially in the early part of the season.
Definitely appreciate it, Tyler. Look forward to coming on again at some point.
All right, that'll do it from today's episode of Basketball in the Mountains. Thanks again to everybody for listening or watching if you're doing so on Spotify or YouTube. Thanks again to Nathan Carroll from Bronco Nation News for coming on today and previewing this really exciting and intriguing Boise State team ahead of another, which should be a fun season up there in Idaho for that team. Like I said, I'm a fan of Leon Rice and his coaching staff. They've done a great job. So looking forward to seeing what they're able to accomplish this season. Thanks again to everybody for listening to this episode. Make sure if you're listening on Spotify or Apple to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, leave a review. All that stuff is super helpful, helps me grow the channel, and is really appreciated by me. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to my channel because we've got plenty more college basketball coverage coming before the start of the season and then once the season gets going as well. I feel like I've got a good schedule set for the start of the season. So we have multiple episodes a week covering not just college, but the NBA and everything we've got going on here because there is so much good stuff happening basketball-wise here in the Mountain Time Zone. And this is why I started the show, is to cover all of it. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks again to Nathan Carroll for joining me on today's episode, and enjoy the weekend of basketball.